and welcome to this channel. In this channel, what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna look at elections from around the world and politics from around the world and see what things might happen just all over the place and have a little bit of fun, not take this too seriously. In the future, maybe some political comedy, maybe just some sketch comedy, but for now, I'm sticking to this. So I'm launching my forecast for the Australian election, which is likely to be in May next year. And I'll show you how I'm doing this because I originally used this model you see up here to measure seats in the Australian Parliament just overall through nationwide swings, but I've decided I'm gonna break this down into what happens state by state level. So I'll just go over our formula runs quickly. So I put in the polls, what they're saying, subnational polls for each state, and then I do work here. I take whatever their previous election results were and I subtract the new score from that, and that gives me the overall swing. And through numerous ways, I can measure the two-party preferred swing. That's a big one, Liberal versus Labour. If you don't know, there are two major parties in Australia, but also Labour versus Greens, Liberal versus Greens, Labour versus others, and Liberal versus others. I am tracking One Nation here, but they're not really a strong enough party to cause any issues in the House. Maybe in the future I measure on the Senate. Okay, so you're probably wondering why I've only got up to October here. Well, that is because it is, as of this recording of video, it is November. There has not been any sub-national polls this November, so I'm only going off what I've got from October, and I chose to start the forecast at May because that's a year out, of course, before I started this channel. So let's just look at what's happening state by state. So what we have here in New South Wales is that Labor generally has been lagging behind for quite a while. They've been looking like they've been having a swing against them. Things are looking better for the Liberals in New South Wales, and the Greens have had a couple of up months. At the moment, they're looking pretty much where they were in 2022. Not much change for One Nation or the others. So let's look at just in October. What is the two-party preferred swing? It's nearly 2%. It is nearly 2%, and there are some seats which I was working on, and there are some that are changing. There are going to be seats that flip. I think Benelong is one of the big ones. It was Liberal for years. Labour got it at the last election. Looks like it's going to flip back. There are a couple of seats in New South Wales, notably Anthony Albanese's seat and I think Environment Minister Tanya Plibersek seats both Labour that the Greens are competing with them for two-party preferred. This only estimates a 1.18% swing to the Greens, so I don't think they'll be picking up any of those seats. Labour does seem to have a swing against them compared to others, so if you don't know, there's an independent Dailey. She was a former member of the Liberal Party, ran an independent campaign in 2022, and actually took a seat off Labour. And as for the Liberals, they do seem to be gaining some ground against the moderate independents, which absolutely ripped through them in Eastern Sydney in 2022. So that's good for them. Uh, I I don't think it's enough to make huge waves, but if I was an independent in Eastern Sydney, I'd certainly be getting somewhat worried. Now let's have a look at Victoria. Compared to the last election, boost for the Liberals, dip for Labor, no change for Greens. One Nation's not really competitive. The Independents losing about 1.5% of the vote. So I think if you are an independent like Monique Ryan or Sophie Scamps, you'd be worried about that. Someone like Helen Haynes in Indi in Northern Victoria, huge margin there. I don't think she should be worried. And we see Labor is still leading the two-party preferred. but it is dead narrow, and if Labour loses that lead in Victoria, that is a huge warning for the rest of the country. But what we see is an absolutely huge swing in a two-party preferred against Labour in Victoria. They're blowing out 4.34% of our two-party preferred lead. That's resulting in a lot of flips. If we look at what my modeling would have shown from previous months, it does show an increase for Liberals and a decrease for Labour. Sometime I get to like an individual seat thing up and running, and I can show you how that would go. We just see the Greens gaining 2% against Labour. Now, if you don't know, the seat of Melbourne, which has been green since 2010, new electoral boundaries were released, and Greens leader Adam Bant would hold that by about 6% above the Labour candidate, but that 2% swing expand to 8%. There are there are actually three other electorates for Greens have our eyes on in the Melbourne area for 2025. That is Macnamara, which is a uh, Macnamara is a electorate in southern Melbourne, which Labor got a pretty big win over Liberal at the last election, but as of Green preferences, if Greens did, I think, is less than 1% better, Greens probably would have won a seat with Labour preferences. And I'll actually update that now. I forgot to update that earlier. I think in that case, I do think the Greens would win that seat. So let me actually update this. This is wrong. It should say Greens 2 seats in Victoria. So that is a gain for them. I do think the Greens will gain the seat of Macnamara. Uh, so there's two other big seats. There's Wills, which the Greens with the new boundaries are only 4% away from winning. That gain there for the Greens, encouraging. Not quite enough to get them over the line, but a slight polling error could get them there if the election was held today. So it's good news for them. Liberal definitely gaining on Greens, but there's no Liberal versus Greens contest really in Melbourne. If I was a Victorian independent, I would be keeping somewhat of an eye out for this. You should keep an eye out for this. Let me put that there. Yeah, my computer's gonna run out of battery soon. I do think I just messed something up with the model here. Sorry if it's so clunky. Yeah. So let's have a look at Queensland. Obviously, big state election last month. There's actually two polls for October. I got the averages of those and then calculated the average of that with the state election, which dragged up the result for Labour and down the result for Greens. So this might be a bit of an overprediction of Labour and a bit of an underprediction of Greens. But when it's a statewide poll, like an election, you can't really just ignore it. So let's look at two-party preferred, 55%. Overall, Labour not suffering a huge swing in two-party preferred from last election, if that holds. Certainly not as bad as it was looking in winter. Uh, if we look at Labour against Greens, that is certainly of concern. If you are in the Greens, you are concerned by that. Because the seat of Brisbane, uh, Greens just came ahead of Labour, and Labour gave the preferences. Greens huge win, but Labour would surpass the Greens and win Brisbane if this holds. Not to say it will. The September numbers would say it doesn't. But October, if these polls are 100% accurate, that could happen, and that is reflected by Queensland Greens losing South Brisbane at the state elections. So, and then there's seat of Griffith. Honestly, Maxwell Chandler Mather, very popular local member, very well known. He's going to put up a good fight. Labor's going to throw a lot at him because I know they have a lot of disagreements with him. This model says Labor retakes the seat. We'll have to wait to see how that plays out over the next few months. So, weirdly, the the one seat that would that the Greens would keep in Queensland in this forecast is Ryan, which is sort of western Brisbane, everything north of the Brisbane River, and everything sort of west of Auchenflower to Wongish area. Yeah. So that swing to the Liberals, it wouldn't be enough to pick Ryan because I think that's 2 point something percent. No real independence in Queensland. There's Katter's Australian Party, but Bob Katter holds a huge margin there. So Labor would actually be able to rebound to seven, taking seats off Greens. But if they don't, well, there's not really much of a way to gain seats in Queensland now for them. So they'll have to be looking at a few things. Western Australia, we all know Western Australia does have an election, I think, and let me see how much battery I got here, 8%. Okay. Western Australia has got an election March next year, so we'll see how that goes. 52% to 48%. That certainly should be ringing alarm bells for the state government. I think I've seen the state polls that are still 55-45, so WA Labor's still probably likely to win. But if we're looking federally, this does sound concerns. Liberals are surging, because with the exception of Curtin, which is held by an independent, pretty much every seat in WA is Liberal versus Labor, and we see Labor losing quite a bit to the Liberals, and the Liberals gaining quite a bit on the independent candidate in Curtin. Not quite enough to take her seat. We do see notionally, with the redistribution, this was 10 Labour, 5 Liberal, 1 Independent, but very, because there is going to be a new seat in WA and it has been marked as notionally Labour. That's the seat of Bullwinkle, but this also shows that if this swing happened, that seat of Bullwinkle would probably likely be gained by the Liberals. So now we have a look at South Australia, where Labor is looking still as strong as ever. I think it's the only state where Labor, this in my forecast, actually has gaining in two-party preferred vote and first preference vote. Is still good for them. I'll make a video sometime of the South Australian state election. But yeah, essentially no change there. Every seat is Liberal versus Labor except for one seat held by the Centre Alliance, which we can pretty much mark as an independent, very moderate views, that party. Tasmania, I sort of got this from state polls, so might not be most accurate. Had to use some sort of special tool to calculate uh, two-party preferred preference flows. So it might not be fully accurate, but I am having actually a swing to Labour. So Tasmania's looking decent for Labour as well. I don't know if it's because, resentment over the Liberal government there, that other than Queensland and the Northern Territory, the only state which has a Liberal government, the only state which has had a Liberal government for more than a few years, as of now. We see there's a lot of things going on with the stadium. We know the Greens used to be, sorry, we know Tasmania used to be the Greens' homeland. Greens, gaining well. If they can get 17% of the statewide vote, that's certainly something to be interested about. Unfortunately, it's pretty evenly spread amongst most electorates, but if they get a good result in 2025, maybe in 28, they can have a real go for some electorates. We see others propelling themselves ahead of Liberal. Others is basically a one independent candidate, Andrew Wilkie. He's a MP in Clark, which is sort of most of a Hobart area. Generally somewhere between Labor and Greens he's regarded. So no changes in Tasmania. No changes. ACT, I'm not going to do all the modelling because unless something weird happens, Labor's winning all those three seats. Northern Territory, I'm basically calculating this off our state election, which was a blue wave. It was a blue tide, and Labour just got blown out of the water then. So that has a huge 12.9% swing to the Liberals on two-party preferred. which means both seats which were Labour would go Liberal. And I think we might see that happen in the Northern Territory in 2025. Certainly one of the seats will flip. So if we add up nationally, Liberal Nationals get to 66 seats. Labour's still the biggest with 71. Greens on 3. Still no One Nation. And then there's 10 independents and others. So, so I'm using this to track. So essentially, what do I reckon's gonna happen? Well, there needs to be a stable government. Put it like this. Greens and Labour will work together. That'll get to 74. At that point, Albanese is you need 76 seats for a majority. Albanese is 2 seats off a working government, but Dutton is 10. Realistically speaking, there's 10 independents. Albanese only needs 2 of them to come over to his side, which realistically I think is going to happen, whether it be the way the Teals lean, whether different parties went different power, so say Cat Australian Party in Queensland, Central Alliance in South Australia. So we'll see how that goes, but my general prediction is if the election was held today off these swings, Albanese would be still the Prime Minister. He would lead a coalition government or a minority government with support of the Greens and various independents. So thank you for watching. I'll try to do some other videos. I've got one on Germany I'm planning on doing. I just learnt how to record these, so yeah, all very fun.